For several months now, we have embarked on a mission to understand the nation of Israel and the significance to us as believers. And I don't know if you'll remember way back to the first sermon or not, but we talked about the reality that today a lot of Christians, a lot of preaching doesn't really include the Old Testament. And that doesn't mean there aren't a few verses here and there, but a lot of times it seems so long ago, and some of the customs seem so strange, and with the animal sacrifice and the pillars of salt and fire from heaven and all that, we just seem so far removed from that a lot of times we have a hard time relating. So we've been on a quest to understand the significance to us as believers today, the significance of it to the New Testament, and the significance of the birth of that nation, a nation that was to be unto God, a nation that was to have laws, to be ruled by law. We call that a republic, by the way. That was how the United States started. I'm not sure where we're at on that, but it's how it's supposed to be. And through that rule of law and that idea that there is right and wrong, and that choosing right is choosing to follow God and to be obedient to God, choosing wrong is to reject Him and to be shunned from that. We understand what it is to be in Christ, because even in our lawlessness, even in our inability to keep the law and to be righteous, God, or Jesus, provided a way so that we could come to God and be made righteous. And so it's important. It's important for us to know the details of how that all happened, the significance of it, how God created this nation, where it came from. And so we've talked about everyone from Noah all the way up to Moses and Aaron, who have now come before Pharaoh. And over the last couple weeks, they have seen quite a tragedy play out in Egypt as Pharaoh decided to not let the Israelite slaves depart. And it basically destroyed their civilization as far as it being great and powerful. It never really saw that level of majesty again. There was some time later on during when Judea and Israel had broken up into two nations. They became powerful again for a little bit, but with Babylon on their border and Assyria on their border, it really was the beginning of the end. And so not only were things bad for a short time, but it was really the beginning of the end for Egypt. And so we've seen that play out. And I want to take just a minute. In fact, if you want to be turning there, we're going to pick it up in Exodus chapter 14. But before we jump back in here and we talk about the Egyptian pursuit, because if you'll remember, after all that and after Pharaoh said, good riddance, and everyone was throwing their gold and silver at them to leave, now all of a sudden Pharaoh changes his mind and goes after them. But I had mentioned we would talk about the significance that we see repeatedly of Pharaoh hardening his heart and of God of hardening Pharaoh's heart, because there's really a lesson in and of itself. And I want to take just a few moments to talk about that as an introduction as we get started. When our hearts are hard, what that really is meaning, what that imagery is suggested, is that we're just not open to the truth. And we've become locked in on a certain path, and we're just not willing to listen or hear from anyone else. All right? You could also define it as teenagehood. Okay, all right, which none of the teenagers in this room, of course, but other teenagers, all right? And some of us, in fact, I would probably venture to say that maybe a majority of us, we never mature out of that, right? We just kind of harden our hearts, and we decide this is how life is supposed to be, and this is how the world is, and then we just fight and rail against everything that isn't, the way we think it should be. And it's a real problem, and I think in our nation especially, it's a real problem because no one's listening. No one's listening to each other. No one's understanding. Nobody wants to know the truth. They just want to be right and prove how they're right. It's a real problem. It's a problem in the media. It's a problem in movies. It's a problem in churches. It's a problem in our businesses and our schools. Because if we're not listening, if we're not open to the truth, if we're not seeking for the truth, then we're going to end up believing what? A lie. That's what we're going to end up believing. And we're going to live our life on things that are based on lies. And so it's a problem. And so Pharaoh hardened his heart. Then you'll notice God began to harden Pharaoh's heart. And that suggests to me this, that once we close ourselves off and we kind of go down that path, there comes a time where God's just done, where he's just done with that, and he's going to leave us in our state. You know, we can only reject him so many times. I don't know how many times that is, but there comes this place. Now, that's not to say that redemption isn't there, but I think that is to say that God is just going to allow us to continue to rebel, that he's not going to keep trying to jump in there and save us time after time, year after year, day after day. And so I think it's a little bit, if I might be maybe a little bit stubborn or hard to get along with you, because sometimes that's what it takes to get us, stirred up enough to maybe get a little mad or irritated, to say that sin is like that. When we allow sin, we kind of crack that door open and we allow sin to come in our life, and we keep kind of choosing that sin over and over and over. Eventually there comes a place where God's just going to give us up to that and say, you know what, that's the choice you've made, live with it. And unfortunately, it's not just in this life, but it's in eternity. And so Pharaoh saw the devastation of his nation. And remember, there's one specific responsibility that a king has. Okay, or we call him Pharaoh, but he's basically like a king. This is a feudal system, more or less. And the king has one responsibility. And that responsibility is to take care of the people. That's it. That's really the only major responsibility that a king or that a ruler has. Now, unfortunately, as we look through history, and as we look around the world, we see that a lot of times rulers, they're thinking about themselves a lot more than their people. All right, they're living high on the hog, and we might stereotype the dictatorship in this way. That you've got this dictator living up in the palace while all his people are starving. And so we have a little bit of that picture. Well, in Egypt, this was Pharaoh's problem. And he was really just looking out for himself. He wasn't really considering all the people, and that's how the Israelites became slaves. Because remember, at first they were elevated. All right, they were honored guests, and Pharaoh had given Joseph great authority. But over time, they forgot what the Israelites had done or what God had done in their midst, and allowed them to become slaves. And now we're taking advantage of them. And so God, through his plan and through his purposes, he allowed Pharaoh's heart to become hard, and it ended up, the worst case was that all the firstborns were killed. And so it was a terrible thing. And so they left, they're on their way out, and now Pharaoh becomes incensed. I mean, I can imagine it would be an emotional roller coaster. All right? I mean, imagine in America, things are generally, seem like anyway, where they're good. We can go to the store and buy bread and milk, and we have law enforcement to keep us safe. So there seems to be a lot of good things that would cause us to tend to not panic. Well, all of a sudden, that is all gone in Egypt. All of that is gone. They're the people that provide labor so that they can have food, the people who serve them and build things and all their manufacturing is pretty well done by the Israelites. All of that is gone. I mean, one minute it's all there, the next minute it's all gone. So I can imagine that at first, it's just like when you come out of surgery or you've broken your leg and falling out of a tree or some trauma has happened, you feel one way, all right? Like, for example, this is not really trauma, and this is, a minimal example to what some of you experienced. But recently, I was cutting some wood outside, and I was not wearing safety glasses. Well, I have kind of developed, up until this point, a habit of doing that for several years. Well, lo and behold, a wood chip flies in my eye, and I mean scratches the heck out of it. And so I'm like walking around this for 3 days. Fortunately, it didn't happen like right before Sunday. Thank you, Lord. But I mean, it was bad, and I was in pain. And immediately after that, I'm thinking, I'm going to wear safety glasses from now on. How stupid was I? I knew this was going to happen, But then what happened? Well, several weeks went by, several months went by, and I'm out cutting wood again. And what did I do? Oh, my safety glasses are in the barn. Should I walk up the hill and get them? Oh, no, I don't have time for that. I've got wood to cut. I got to get ready for next winter. And so, actually in the end I did stop and go get the safety glasses. But things kind of change, right? When that reminder of pain is there, we're focused, all right? We're dedicated, we're going to change, all right? We're never going to do that again. But then as time goes on, so I think after, some time went by here, and it's hard to tell, maybe a day or so, Pharaoh's thinking, whoa, wait a minute. What are we doing? We cannot let these people go. So here he's off. And it says, we'll pick it up in verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about the people, and they said, what have we done? We have released Israel from serving us. So he got his chariot ready. He took his troops with him. And he took 600 of the best chariots and all the rest of the chariots of Egypt with officers in each one. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and pursued the Israelites. So let's talk about that for a minute. Now there was one thing that Egypt still had, all right, at the end of all this, okay, at the end of them basically being plundered. In fact, I think we saw that word actually being used in chapter 13. It said, and in this way the Israelites plundered the Egyptians, all right, but they had one thing left. What was that? What was the one thing they had left? Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, their army. Okay, this is the last thing. And God says, I am not even going to allow Egypt to keep their army. Okay, which is a problem, right? Because remember, before we mentioned there's quite a few, and I just named a few of them, savage, angry nations around Egypt. Well, now God is going to take away the last thing that they have. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he pursued the Israelites who were going out triumphantly. All right, so they're excited. They're like, hey, we're free, and we have lots of gold and silver, which is a bonus, And so they're very excited. They're triumphantly heading out to go wherever it is they're going. They've not really thought about the question like, oh, well, where are we going? Nope, they're just excited to be going anywhere other than under the Egyptian whip. And so they're headed out. And it says, the Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his horsemen, his army, chased after them and caught up with them as they camped by the sea, beside Pi-hahiroth, in front of Baal-zephon. Not to be confused with like Hoth in Star Wars. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up and saw that the Egyptians were coming after them. And the Israelites were terrified, and they cried out to the Lord for help. All right, so imagine, most of us in here are not trained in the military, don't have, fully automatic weapons. So imagine this huge army is all of a sudden coming after us, and they have, tanks and helicopters and all kinds of stuff to blow us up with. And we're going to be a little bit panicked, all right, especially when there's a large number of them pursuing him. And that is what is happening to the Israelites. And they said, leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Now I want you to remember this statement, okay, because we're going to see this again more than one time. So already, all right, they just got out of slavery. Already they're complaining, okay? Well, that sounds a little bit familiar, or like maybe something we might do here in this room, not we collectively, but as individuals. All right, so they're thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm going to get mowed down by the Egyptians, okay? Because that's pretty well, they like go by in their chariot and they have a sword or something, and as they go by, because the chariot moves fast, and we don't when we're on, unless we're like Michaela House, we're not moving that fast, or a few others that are runners. So they're a little bit remorseful of their decision. But Moses says to the people, don't be afraid. Stand firm. See the Lord's salvation. He will provide for you today. All right? And notice, that's a New Testament verse, actually. That God's not giving us a spirit of fear. So don't be afraid. First thing that Moses says, don't be afraid. Why is he saying that? Is that because Moses just feels like nothing bad can ever happen because he knows God and speaks to him in burning bushes? No, it's because he knows that no matter what happens, God's got a plan. It's going to work according to his plan. Whether that's, comes to our benefit or not, we shouldn't be afraid. We shouldn't be worried, which is easier said than done. And he goes on in verse 13, he says, stand firm, see the Lord's salvation. He will provide for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. Well, that sounds pretty good. I'm sure they're thinking, okay, God, let's see what you do. The Lord will fight for you, and you must be quiet. Boy, that's a good verse. Let's talk about that for just a moment. Okay, that's good. You do that. Remind Coy of that. That's hard. I mean, when we're confronted with something like that, an antagonist, we either have a tendency to fight or flight, right? We're either going to run away, better part of valor, or we're going to just stand and fight, okay? I feel like usually in those situations, I'm just like, okay, I'm ready to, draw my gun and fire away, okay? Because I don't have a sword, so that's what I have. And God is saying, nope, don't do that. Just be quiet. I'm going to handle it, all right? Many of us are not very good at that, all right? Let's just own up to that for a minute. We're not very good at that. We want to take matters into our own hands. We want to do it ourselves, work our plan, and then, we don't want to wait for God. And we certainly don't want to be quiet, okay? We're kind of loud, bunch of loudmouths. If you go in a restaurant in America, what do you hear? Lots of noise. If you go in a restaurant somewhere else, like in Central America, Europe, Asia, you know what you hear in a restaurant? It's very quiet. People are talking quietly, having a conversation. They're not blah, 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 okay, like we are, all right? So this is a struggle for us in particular here in America. Verse 15, the Lord says to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to break camp. And as for you, lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground." Now that's just cool, okay? I have not yet experienced this moment in my life where God tells me to do something really cool like this, like raise up my staff, okay, and then all of a sudden the ocean walls are going to literally like magically part, okay, and some invisible supernatural force field, because I have to use sci-fi terms because that's just how I roll, is going to part these waters, and they're going to walk down into the basin of that and walk right across. Okay, that is just a cool moment. I don't know if I will ever get to experience anything like that in my life, but I'm happy for Moses that he did, because I think I would probably just be standing there like this. With this look on my face like, did you just say that really? Because that is cool. All right, and so that's exactly what happened. And God says, "I'm going to harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will receive glory by means of Pharaoh, all his army, and his chariots and horsemen." Which is the inverse of what had happened before, right? Because Pharaoh was taking all the glory. God said, "I want my people to do this." Pharaoh says, nope, not going to happen. And so he was robbing God, stealing from God, taking glory from God. And now God says, I will be glorified through this. And he says in verse 18, "The Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh, and when I receive glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." Then the angel of God, who was going in front of the Israelite forces. Now notice, remember we talked a little bit about this, all right? The angel of God, or in the different ways that we see that, have seen that take place, like with Lot and Abraham and such. So there is an angel of God now that is going in front of the Israelite forces, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved in front of him, because remember they were following that pillar of smoke, or that cloud. And it stood behind them, and it came between the Egyptian and the Israelite forces. The cloud was there in the darkness, yet it lit up the night. So neither group came near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back with a powerful east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with the waters like a wall to them on their right and their left. And the Egyptians set out in pursuit, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen, and they went into the sea after them.